I'm John Rodgers from Cuyahoga Falls, and you've seen some of my programs before, and this is one of those ones where I do a lot of little short ones and put the whole thing together as a program. We're going to look at first North Platte today. North Platte is a town in Nebraska, and you can see with my arrow on the U.S. map approximately where it is. Now, this town out on the Great Plains is listed as 2,809 feet in elevation with a population of 24,000. What you're looking at is a prairie town. This is not North Platte, this is Sutherland. But you go through there, and I just wanted to give you an idea of what one looked like. But those things only begin to tell the story about North Platte. The North Platte and the South Platte. Now we're up in this area of Nebraska. We will later in this very same program be over on this side, and we'll be looking at birds. This border is with Colorado here, and we're way out in Nebraska. The North Platte and the South Platte rivers join on the east side of town. This is the Platte, on their way to the Missouri River. Now, on the north side of the Platte River, the Mormon Trail ran. This is one of the pioneer trails. And on the south side of the river, the Oregon Trail ran. These were two great trails of the westward pioneer movement. And then Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, runs right through wheat fields like you're seeing here, and here's some wheat harvesting. Well, wheat ready for the harvest, and then here is the harvest. This was one of the early highways that linked the country since about 1915. And this is the Lincoln Highway, Route 30, and it still goes right through North Platte, Nebraska. Buffalo Bill Cody lived on the north side of town, and you can go through his house and his barn. It's called Scout's Rest Ranch. Well, you can read that off the top of the barn. And he's a reminder that the Pony Express and the Overland Stage also went through here. He was one of the riders of the Pony Express. Now, I had to go to Wyoming to get this statue of him at Cody, Wyoming. And the first Continental Railroad, and we will be talking about railroads a bit here. First Continental Railroad ran through North Platte, or the Transcontinental Railroad, really. And I have not been to it, but the Lincoln County Historical Society Museum and Village is also located here. I-80 is the main route across Nebraska, but once the main line of the Union Pacific Railroad had that distinction. It runs right through town, and that brings us to the story that sets this prairie town apart. Starting on Christmas Day, 1941, just after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and continuing until April the 1st, 1946, about 7 months after World War II ended, a miracle happened here. Now, these are old pictures, and my daughter obtained the actual pictures of operations of the North Platte Canteen. She got them for me from the internet, and then I made slides of them. So that is what it actually looked like, and the building is gone today. But a group of women got together and started a canteen in the railroad building for any military personnel who were on a train that stopped in North Platte during that whole time. And here a train has just stopped, and the service people are heading into the canteen. These ladies provided pies, sandwiches, coffee, and other beverages, cake, and all kinds of good things. And here is inside the canteen during its operation. Now today, all you can see is this little park-like area here, and the building was right along here. And you can see by the grain elevators that we're truly in North Platte, Nebraska. Some more of the operation of it. But these people were also met with friendly words, warm smiles, and heartfelt thanks. And everything was free, with no government or public money. Everything, food, service, hours, was donated by private citizens and local businesses. And the effort expanded out to other towns on the prairies. They brought in food to the canteen. Colorado was involved also. A little prairie town might say, okay, we will supply all the pie that you need every Thursday. And they would have it at the canteen by 5 o'clock in the morning on the appointed day. And the train started running about that time. Now, trains would stop for coal and water, only 10 to 20 minutes. But there were as many as 23 trains in a day that started at about 5 a.m. and ended with the last train just after midnight. And for all of those years, every train was met. This is a plaque just briefly describing what I'm telling you as we're going through right there. And then in operation. And these people also gave up something that we don't even think about these days. Many items were rationed, and rationed very tightly. I'm going to catch my pictures up because I have something that you haven't seen in a long time, and I want you to gaze on it a little bit. But I had a few on-site pictures to get you to that point, and one in operation. Oh yes, they had a piano there, and they had people there all the time. Friendly words and everything else. Many items were rationed, and rationed very tightly, okay? They gave up sugar rations and other food rations, gasoline and tire rations in the case of outlying towns. And the stamps that I have on the screen at this point are gasoline ration stamps. The population of North Platte at this time was only 12,000. One woman made angel food cakes, up to 8 a week, using turkey eggs that someone gave her. And this picture that we have now is the front of a book called Once Upon a Town by Bob Greene. It's very recently been published. And his revealing comment is, the best America there ever was. During those long war years, around 6 million service people had benefited from the North Platte Canteen. Remember this, these might appear as just chance encounters, but many of these people were young, lonesome, far from home and fearful, and were headed into war in Europe or the Pacific. And suddenly, out on the sprawling Great Plains, there were people who actually cared. Now, if the people on these trains were the greatest generation, then these people of the canteen were the angels of the prairies. And this was one of the greatest love stories of our country's history. No passenger trains pass through now, and the depot is gone. But at the very least, let's keep the memory of this miracle alive. Now, I mentioned that we would have a number of different subjects, and we will move away from North Platte, but don't ever forget it. And we will move out into Arizona to Kitt Peak National Observatory. It's optical astronomy. This location is in the Quinlan Mountains in the Sonoran Desert. It was selected in 1958. That is the mountain that you're seeing. It's on the Papago Reservation in Arizona. The elevation is 6,882 feet. And the selection of the site is based on clear weather, remoteness from bright lights, vegetation heights, and suitable summit area. The closest city is Tucson, but it's quite a ways away. And that was one of the optical telescopes. This is the largest solar telescope in the world, studying the sun. Why astronomy? Better understanding of man's place and his surroundings in the universe is the explanation usually given for all of this study. Visitor Center has a number of interesting things. Explanations like this one, but they also have one where it's a chunk of rock and they say, pick it up. And you try to pick it up and you can hardly do it because it is a chunk of meteorite and it is really heavy. And then while you're up here, you might get the chance to see storms coming across the desert, and they're always interesting. Now, the solar telescope is the largest in the world with an 80-inch main mirror and a 110-foot vertical tower. Focusing is in the observing room, 300 feet away from the image-forming mirror. We are going to go in it in just a moment, but here from the solar telescope is some of the other telescopes that stud the top of this mountain. The building is encased in copper with coolants piped through the skin. Here's my storm again. The light shaft is 500 feet long with 3/5 of it underground, and we are actually in the solar telescope at this point. And the solar telescope is also used at night. And I have one more picture inside the telescope. Now, the Nicholas Mail is a 4-meter telescope. It's 19 stories tall. Some of the views from Kitt Peak are quite interesting, but let's get back over. Oops, I always have these flowers in my pictures. I really like flowers. That is a Jimson weed growing on top of the mountain. I'll have something else to show you of that nature in a moment. This is the Mail 4-meter telescope. It's 19 stories tall, and the 4-meter diameter mirror is of fused quartz. And this is the nation's second largest optical telescope. This is another one of the displays in the visitor center. But let's go in that telescope here as soon as this. I think the storm has finally passed by. A nice cloud up there, and you can see one road off in the distance. Nope, it's still going out there in the desert. The telescope and its mountings weigh 375 tons, but the balance is such that accurate tracking is done with a 0.5 horsepower motor. And the movable dome is heavy, 500 tons, with a shutter opening 30 feet across. And I mentioned that I was going to show you another interesting little thing besides the Jimson weed. These are ladybugs that congregate up on the top of Kitt Peak, and by the thousands, and they're really interesting to see. Now, this is not the one that we have been having in our area the last few years that has that awful odor to it. These are the more friendly bugs. And then we're back down on the desert floor looking back up at the beautiful Kitt Peak. And that is the saguaro cactus just left of center there. Now we're going to come all the way back over into the east, and we're going into Virginia and Montpelier. Now don't mistake this for the one up in New England. This is Montpelier, the James and Dolly Madison home. It's the home to 3 generations of Madisons, 1723 to 1844. The home was built around 1755 to 1760. It took a while, and it's owned now by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And here are a few views inside this house. They have 27,000 acres, and this is fox hunting in the horse country of Orange County in the Piedmont of Virginia, the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Very, very nice house. And we got to go all through it, and that was quite nice. And they let me take pictures in there, and I always like this. Now I'm standing in the front of the house looking towards some of the horse racing tracks over in the distance, and the front of the house. James Madison was the fourth president of the United States. They built this little temple, they called it, while he was president. He was considered the father of he is considered the father of the American Constitution. And Dolly Madison saved a portrait. This is some of the farm operations from that little temple. Dolly Madison saved a portrait of George Washington from the president's house in Washington before the British burned it in the War of 1812. This is a beautiful holly. This is Burford holly there in the foothills. That's not native, but it's a real pretty one. And here is a painting of the burning of the president's house. See, it was not called the White House until after it was rebuilt. And Dolly Madison is the first president's wife to be called First Lady. This is the back of the house now. The main house faces west towards the Blue Ridge. And the temple in the classical style was built while Madison was president. And the garden that you see mostly represents DuPont influence. And there was a cluster of wooden buildings for slaves, but it is gone. So I'm going to show you around the gardens a little bit. Now these are not real elaborate Versailles type gardens, but they're small enough so that you can envelop them and walk through them, and that's kind of nice. There are those lions laying there again. You saw those once before. And now, in addition to the Madison family cemetery, there was also an African-American cemetery right on the property. And the Madison family cemetery is close by the site of the first house, which was built in 1726. And it is the final resting place of James and Dolly Madison. And here's Dolly. And you might remember from your history that Dolly Madison also served as hostess in the White House for Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson's wife had died. And here is a statue there of James and a painting of James, the father of the American Constitution. And that concludes our visit to the Madisons. So we're going back out to Nebraska, and that's other section I showed you on the map, and you can see the arrow pointing to it there. It's where we're going to see sandhill cranes and snow geese. Now here's a little map that I colored up about the area. See, here's the Platte River coming down through here. Here's Grand Island, which is a little town, and Kearney. And we're talking about this area about 50 miles maybe between Grand Island and Kearney. And that is the Platte River running there. And this is I-80 running right through there, right through the middle of it. Now, if you, that's talking about the sandhill cranes. Now, when we start talking about the snow geese, this Harvard Marsh and the marsh at Aurora will come into play. And they're really called rainwater basins out there. In this part of the country, we normally call those wetlands. Now, one of the great dramas of North American migration takes place in Nebraska. Now, our camera may have may have left you with a blank piece of sky there, but that picture has the moon and the evening star in it. But let's go on to daybreak. Now, this drama takes place in the Platte River in the spring. And the spring is roughly defined from the last week in February to about the first week in April. 500,000 sandhill cranes stay for 4 to 5 weeks before heading on north to their breeding grounds. And this is most of the world's population of these birds. And you can see some of them still standing on the sandbars in the river, and up in the sky you can see some of them are already on their way for the day's activity. Beginning in the last week of February and continuing into the first week of April, these birds rest each night on those sandbars in the Platte River in 6 inches of water. There are about 400,000 birds in the area between Grand Island and Kearney, a distance of only about 50 miles. Interstate Highway, as I said, I-80 runs the same distance as the river through there. And they're black in the sky already as they get up in the morning. And here they are. I'm going to show you where we are when I'm taking this picture in a moment. But the birds are out on the sandbars, and these have not taken off to do their activity, but there are a lot of birds already in the sky at this point. I'll give you this information about the size of the bird in a moment. They're still taking off. Some of them are still down. Now this is the blind or bunker. They call it a blind. I call it a bunker, from which you can watch the evening arrival at the Platte or the morning takeoffs. Now if you're going for the morning takeoffs, you have to drive in before daybreak without lights, and they go in a little caravan, and then you go into this bunker. It can hold about 25 to 30 people, and they will have one person in charge there to keep everybody on the straight and narrow. Now, beginning at a short time after daybreak, the cranes start taking off into the early morning air, and they usually swing south to feed on corn that was dropped in the fields during last fall's harvest. And you can see there are a lot of birds up in the sky there. Many, many birds. And here's a little bit of the Platte River in the bottom, which I don't believe you can see, and a lot of birds up in the sky over the Platte. And here's a closer picture. We'll see them on the ground in a moment, but here's a closer picture of them in the sky. This is a staging area for these sandhill cranes. They gain about 1 pound of solid fat during this time, and this will be depended on to carry them over if the nesting area they later reach is covered with snow. And then they're going to do their courtship dancing. They have a nice, interesting little dance, and then they will start raising the young, the egg laying and the incubation, and then starting with the young. Here's a little closer. Now I can tell you, an adult sandhill crane, which you're looking at, stands about 3.5 feet tall to 4 feet with a 6-foot wingspan. And he or she weighs about 6 to 7 pounds. Now these are migratory birds, so you're not allowed to bother them. You're not allowed to go rushing into a group of them to spook them. That is forbidden. Now they have started a little bit of the courtship dancing here, and that will continue as they go on north. And I'll have a map in just a moment to show you where they actually go. And this is the first picture where you've been able to see the red on the tops of their heads. You have to get in kind of close to be able to see that. The farmers like these birds because those kernels of corn are from hybrid corn, and that is not used for seeding. And it springs up all over the place if the birds don't get it, and then you got to cut it down because you can't harvest anything decent from it. Now something, not me, all I've done, I'm still in my van at this point, and I've lowered my window, but something spooked the birds, and that bar that you see across there is one of the irrigation bars out there, and the birds are just going up in the air. Something came along, I don't really know what it was. A coyote can walk by, a bald eagle can fly by, anything like that can happen. Now these birds have spent the winter in Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico. And when they leave Nebraska, they'll fly to northern Canada. I'll show you this on a map. Northern Alaska or Siberia, where they will continue their unique courtship dancing and breed and start their young ones on their way. Now we are down here in, this is where they winter, the top part of the northern part of Mexico. New Mexico has quite a few, and a little bit along the Gulf there. And then they fly up to here in late February, and this is Nebraska. This is the staging area. Then they fly up here, and some go into Canada, but way up in Alaska, and then some actually fly to Bering Straits and go over and do the rest of the breeding in Siberia. Now, this has been going on for perhaps 10 million years. The difference being no corn on the ground, but lots of weed seed and grass seed, plus lots more shellfish in the river than today. In the shallow water and wetlands, the birds even today find frogs, crayfish, mice, insects. Mid-March is a good time to see these wonderful birds and hear their bugling cries. During the day, they're visible on the ground or at almost any elevation, as you can see by this picture. Sometimes you'll look up and see hundreds of them in many different flights. And this is sunset out in Nebraska, and that's a flight of sandhill cranes, a fairly small flight. It's a wonderful experience, but there's more. The sandbars are used by other visitors also. And I hope you can see my two bald eagles sitting on one of the sandbars. It will not come quite into focus, but you can see distinctly two bald eagles there. And this little guy, it was almost twilight when he decided to come across. This is a deer. He came across, and right outside of the picture is a whole bunch of sandhill cranes. And those cornfields serve another kind of animal, like these pigs. Now, snow geese are in the area at the same time, but they go to the rainwater basins, wetlands, and you don't see them on the Platte River. I am still out on the highway at this point. This is the Harvard Marsh under here, and if you can see all this blackness in the sky here, I can't tell how visible it is. All of those are birds, and we will come into them a bit more. Here you can see a lot of them in the sky. Now this is a bird about 2.5 feet long with a 5-foot wingspan. He's in blue color and in white. And this is, these are two stuffed specimens that I took at one of the places out west, not here at the Harvard Marsh. They don't have any right there. Now one of the best places to see them is south of I-80 and to the east of the town of Hastings. This is not far from Grand Island, which I mentioned when we were talking about the sandhills. and they go up into the air, and they're just a real fascinating bird to watch. You'll see it more distinctly later on, but you can see some whites and some blues up in the sky at that point. Now this is at the Harvard Marsh. Now my wife and I were at the little park and area north of the basin that's called the Harvard Marsh when something spooked the birds. And again, it's just like with the sandhills. It could have been a coyote walking by. That most likely it was something like that. I didn't see any eagles in the area. And something spooked the birds, and at least 10,000 birds took to the air over the water. And you can see there are quite a few birds. What a sight. Now here's a picture where you can see the distinct difference between the dark blue and the white. They call them phases. Species-wise, it's the exact same bird, but one of them is white and one of them is very dark blue. And here is another bunch of them, and this is over the Aurora Marsh. And I pointed that out on the little map. Some nice blue sky out there in this part of the country. Now these snow geese nest on the Arctic tundra, and they go up by the thousands. And we are going to be going on to another subject very shortly, and that will be out in the west also. These where I'm using a telephoto lens, and sometimes you can hardly see the sky. You can see some of it in this picture, but sometimes they're so thick you can hardly see anything through the mass of birds, and there are lots of them. Okay, here's our next destination, Cedar Breaks National Monument, and this is in Utah. If you see the arrow, it is in the southwestern corner of Utah. It is in the national park system, but it's not a park, it's a monument. It was established in 1933. Let me show you a picture on the way into it. The sheep are grazing on a hillside as we're making our way from the west up to the high ridge, which is Cedar Breaks. And then, right as we got to it, there's this forest of aspen, and I like those, the trunks of those trees. And then as we got to the entrance to Cedar Breaks, you could stop and look around, and off in the distance over in here would be Zion National Park, also in Utah, Lower Utah. Now Cedar Breaks, this is the visitor center. I think this one really goes with this little monument. It was established in 1933. It has an elevation of about 10,000 feet, and it's westward facing. The giant amphitheater was a limey ooze in freshwater lakes at about sea level back eons ago. And over the last 13 million years, it was uplifted to its present 10,000 feet. Rain, wind, snow, and ice were also working on it. And this is mostly eroded limestone, but it's not too white because of many impurities, especially iron and manganese. Lava close by indicates some volcanic work also going on. And we're looking right down into it. It's, some people consider it a sort of miniature Bryce Canyon, but it has a character all of its own. And it has another thing that I want to show you in the way of vegetation. But looking down into the canyon is just a sight to behold. It really is neat. And you can see in this picture especially where the layers were laid down by the sea. very distinct layers of deposit, making it up. And then on one of the banks, I think it's on the eastern side, you'll see forests and mountain wildflowers, and you will see this plant, this tree. This is a bristlecone pine. This is the species that contains the oldest living thing in the world. The oldest living thing in the world is Methuselah. It is a bristlecone pine growing in the White Mountains of California, north of Death Valley. I personally have never seen Methuselah, but Methuselah is said to be 4,400 years old and still alive and still grows. And some of these, the one you're looking at is probably about 1,600 years old already. And here's what the cones on it look like. Very distinct cones. Those are the whole cones. Mule deer, marmots, and pika, and I haven't seen the pika, but they're said to be here in Cedar Breaks also. Now, there's a 5-mile rim drive with 4 main viewpoint stops that you can see. And looking down into the canyon, it's just really something. Several trails are available. Remember, 10,000 feet, not too much oxygen for you, so move slowly. The amphitheater is about 2,000 feet deep with a 3-mile diameter. It's hard to put a diameter on it. You can put the depth, but it doesn't correspond to diameter very good. It has stone spires, columns, arches, and minor canyons in it. All of this, and it isn't crowded. Here's a black-tailed deer walking around. And then before I show you one last thing, I want to show you just a few more looking into the canyon because it's so fantastic. It really is. And hardly anybody around. I have not known many people that have been here, only the ones that I have sent. And then, if you're going from here over to Bryce Canyon, if you choose your road correctly, you can go very close to an extremely large old lava flow. Everything out here is the lava from a volcano years ago, and so that sort of puts a little extra touch on it for you. Now we're going to stay out west, but we're going a little to the east to Oklahoma. We're going to the Will Rodgers Memorial. This is at Claremore, Oklahoma, if you follow the red arrow in on my map. Now, at this location, Will Rodgers was going to build a home. This is Will on Soapsuds. Soapsuds was his favorite horse during his lifetime. And the little building back there is sort of a museum that has a good statue of him and has other memorabilia about him. And just on the other side of the statue, down a little bit, is where Will is buried. Will was a cowhand, a great roper all of his life. He was a rodeo performer. He was a columnist in 350 newspapers. He was called a homespun philosopher, and he was a movie actor as well. I have you inside the museum now, and this is one of the murals in the museum. Will was born November 4th, 1879. He had some Cherokee blood from both his mother and his father, and there's that statue inside the museum. He was on stage in New York City in 1905, but his first real fame was in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1915. He started in motion pictures then in 1918, and he was the star of many films. He was married in 1908 to Betty Blake, an Arkansas school teacher. And Will was killed in an Alaska plane crash on the way to the Orient with Wiley Post. Now, this is Will Hare, and Wiley Post is the one here with the patch over his eye. The crash was near Point Barrow, that is way up in Alaska. You might be interested in some of the quotes from Will Rodgers. Here I have one to go with the picture because he's holding a newspaper. And he said, "All I know is what I read in the papers." And he says, "Rumors travel faster, but it don't stay put as long as truth." There is good news from Washington today. The Congress is deadlocked and can't act. You can laugh at that one. The trouble with practical jokes is that very often they get elected. Okay? I never met a man I didn't like, and some people add to that, and he never met some of the ones that I met. We're the only country on earth to drive to the poorhouse in a Cadillac. And then he said, when everybody has got money, they cut taxes, and when they're broke, they raise them. That's statesmanship of the highest order. And right down in here is where Will Rodgers and his wife are buried. Now, just to go around a little bit more, here is that Will and Soapsuds. And here's a painting of Will, which is real good. That looks like he's dressed to go up into Alaska. And then just so that you would know that you can still see cowboys working with cattle out west. And they're not too plentiful, but you can see them if you're looking for them. And so that is a neat thing to know about. And here's that statue of Will in the museum again. And out in the side is the museum over in the distance. And that's where we will stop with Will Rodgers, and we will go on to another subject. Now we're going to talk about the Wichita Mountains. It's a wildlife refuge in Oklahoma, established in 1905. My daughter says there can't be mountains in Oklahoma, they got to be hills. But she was sort of impressed with them, so we'll call them mountains. They're small mountains, and they do different. They run east and west with Lawton on the east. This is just a map of that area, gives you the title and so forth. And this Mount Scott is one of the principal places we're going, and Lawton is right over in this area. And we will be going back in here. And a lot of this is military because Lawton is the home of Fort Sill. And Fort Sill means artillery and practice. Now, this is Mount Scott there, the highest part of it. As I said, east and west. And first, we were up on Mount Scott. And just to give you an idea of the breadth of land around and so forth, we'll take a couple of views from there. You can see the road that we used coming up, and another view, and then we will be back up on here again in a few moments. But I want to show you a little bit of the stuff around there. There's prairie grass, and there's herds of buffalo, and if you look right in the middle here, you will see one of the strangest birds I've ever encountered, and that is a roadrunner. And a roadrunner is the one that's used in advertising with the beep beep. There is an actual bird. He's a member of the cuckoo family, hardly ever flies. He runs. And he's found out in the desert and out in this prairie country. It's a real great little bird. And I was interested that I was able to photograph him in the Wichitas. Now the buffalo are here also. And I'll talk more about the buffalo as we go along. And there are elk here, which I personally have not seen, but I have seen the Texas longhorn. And we will see him in just a moment. Here's a nice buffalo here. And there are lots of deer around as well. And you see some of these from time to time. Now that is not a poisonous snake. That is a snake, granted, but not poisonous. And here are longhorn cattle. There is a herd of longhorn cattle there on this refuge. And here's one you can really see the extent of his horns. Mount Scott on the east, and then remember I said military is around here? I photographed this right from Mount Scott. They had just dropped practice bombs from planes from down at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Had just dropped bombs here. So I don't know how that affects wildlife. Well, I know how it affects wildlife. They don't like it, but anyhow. That's something you have to be concerned with. Now, Mount Scott is on the eastern end, and it's the highest peak at 2,464 feet. So that isn't very high. The mountains are in Kiowa and Comanche counties. And these are the tops of sunken mountains. They have rough granite peaks. And part of the mountains are within the boundary of Fort Sill. And I just recently took this picture because I was recently back up on the top of Mount Scott. And I like to take pictures of these dead trees, especially the ones that have weathered into that nice whitish silver. And this is an earlier picture of Mount Scott off in the twilight there. Now, while Theodore Roosevelt was president, Comanche Chief Quanah Parker had word passed to him that it would do his heart good to see buffalo roaming again below Mount Scott. And again, I have you on Mount Scott. And from the New York Zoological Society through Theodore Roosevelt, a shipment of 15 animals was made in 1907. And the result of that start is maintained at about 625 buffalo today. And every one of those buffalo pictures that you saw were buffalo that came from that original stock gotten there by Mr. Roosevelt. This is lichen. If you're not familiar with it, it's a combination of algae and fungi, and it breaks down the rock, and much of it is very, very colorful. So that's why I have it in there. And this is Quanah Parker Lake, and you can see a longhorn right out by it. This is named for that Comanche chief. Now, there are 30 head of Texas longhorn, which we saw, were brought here in 1927, and they're now maintained at about 300. This is Spring Creek. You don't have too many creeks, so you take pictures of them. And this one's trickling down stone steps, so to speak. Here's some more of the buffalo. The elk and the deer were introduced, but I don't know exactly when, and they're maintained by a fall hunt. And this is one last picture from the south of Mount Scott, off in Oklahoma sky. Now we're going to move back over into Arizona. Remember, we were there for the astronomical observatory, but this time we're going to move into the southeast corner, and that is Cochise County. Cochise County borders on Mexico and New Mexico. And this county contains much of the Chiricahua Mountains. It was home to the Chiricahua Apaches with names like Cochise and Geronimo. Fort Bowie and the town of Tombstone are also here. And we're going to look at the Chiricahua Mountains first. Incidentally, we just mentioned Fort Sill not long ago, and Geronimo was held prisoner at Fort Sill for a time. So we're going to look at the Chiricahua Mountains, but just to show you what we're going to look at in Cochise County. See, this is New Mexico, this is Mexico. Here's Tombstone over here. We're going to go there last. We're going to go into the Chiricahua Mountains, which extend over into New Mexico, and we're going to Fort Bowie, a National Historic Site. Those are the three places that we will look at. The Chiricahua National Monument was declared that in 1924. Sugarloaf, oh boy, I'll get this. Sugarloaf Mountain is the highest peak in the monument. Chiricahua Peak, 9,798 feet, now we're talking about mountains really, is south of here, and it's the highest peak in these mountains. It's in the Coronado National Forest. Cochise Head, 8,100, is northeast of here, and it's closer to Apache Pass. These mountains were volcanic, followed by uplifting and tilting. And you can see a lot of rock out in these mountains. Now, if you look very closely, they say that this is Cochise. This is his nose hair and his eyebrows hair and his chin hair, Cochise. Some of these names, the Chiricahua Mountains, if you watched The Lone Ranger when you were a kid, you might remember the Chiricahua Mountains. And off in the distance you can see a little volcanic action, activity. This is one of those century plants. It's in the cactus family. It will be down with these thick, large leaves with spines on the end, and then in about 25 years, 23 to 25 years, it will send up this high flower shoot, will bloom, set seed, spread the seed, and then the whole plant dies. And it's called a century plant. Lots of nice rock here in the Chiricahuas. See all the rock down below, as well as the protrusion of the rock up above, and it's really great stuff. I have in my notes lots of rock, and that is certainly true. Beautiful sky, puffy clouds. Now we're going to be moving over to Fort Bowie. Now we will park here and go in this trail back into Fort Bowie. This is Apache Pass over here that I mentioned before, and the Fort Bowie was a center for the campaigns against the Chiricahua Apaches. And here is a distant view. We have just parked our car, and we're going all the way back into there. That's about 3.5 miles back into there, and we will see a few things on the way. The fort was built in 1868. And the first Fort Bowie was built on a different location in 1862. Here's an old wagon that was discarded there many years ago. Both fort locations are in the area of Apache Pass over to the west, which I showed you on the map, and Apache Springs, the water source. And it's very close to the forts. The pass has an elevation of a little over 5,000 feet. Now, what you're looking at here is the remains of a station of the Butterfield stage. Now, we've talked about the Overland stage on up through Nebraska, but the Butterfield stage ran down here, And here's a painting of what they think it looked like. Now, what is left here is not much, but this was a real communications and real route through this part of the country. The trailhead for the hike into the fort, hey, I have this not 3.5 miles long, and it can get very hot. We got into the fort, and the old ranger there, and he was an old ranger, he said, "You folks must not mind the heat. It's about 105 out here today." And on the way, you pass a number of interesting places, and we've already passed some of them. Unknown, killed by Apaches. Somebody is buried there. And this is the Apache Springs here. We're coming on back now. You can see off in the distance some of the fort. Incidentally, I have that stage ruins that we saw there was built in 1858 for the Butterfield stage. Some of the cactus that you pass on the way in. A little bit of the cemetery for the post for the fort. And up in there is where the original fort was. This is the site of the last battle against the Apaches. This is some of the Chiricahua Mountains as we go back in. Now we have moved over. Fort Bowie was abandoned in 1894, and we have moved over now to the third and last place that we're going to visit in Cochise County, and that is the town of Tombstone. This is an old western town with a newspaper called, as you can see, the Tombstone Epitaph. And it has a place called the OK Corral, but here's the Opera House there. Now the gunfight at the OK Corral, where we are now, occurred on October the 26th, 1881. On the law side were Virgil Earp, Chief of Police, Morgan and Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and Wyatt was said to be a deputy marshal at that time, and then Doc Holliday. And on the other side, the outlaws were Ike and Billy Clanton, Frank and Tom McLaren, and Billy Claiborne. And here's where you go into the OK Corral. Now these were the outlaws here, including him, and these were the Earps, and this is Doc Holliday here. The gunfight lasted only about 30 seconds. Frank and Tom McLaren and Billy Clanton were killed, and Virgil and Morgan Earp were severely wounded. That's the diagram, and here is what you would see today. This is Doc Holliday over here, and here are the Earps here. And so they have these to look like what happened right in the fight. And then you can go out also. These are the ones that got killed here. These are the outlaws. And they do have... when you leave here, you can walk out to Boot Hill, and several of them are buried out at Boot Hill here. I remember seeing the tombstone of Billy Clanton, anyhow, out here at the Boot Hill of Tombstone. Cactus out there, kind of neat. And then here's one last shot of Boot Hill. rather dry place. Now, we ran across, my wife and I, when we were going through New Mexico one time in Cimarron Canyon, we ran across a ghost town. I don't know too much about it, but I have it pointed out where it is, and I want to just show you 4 views. This is a real old Wild West ghost town. It's some darkness in it, and no one's around. It's a Sunday afternoon, and there's only a beautiful sky and old buildings falling apart. And your thoughts might dwell on once upon a time. It's just fallen apart. Now, we're going to, one of the reasons this is called Places and Things, we're going to look at Clydesdale horses. The Clydesdale horses were in this area at Rolling Acres a number of years ago. The Clydesdale is a breed from Scotland. They're known as the gentle giants. They stay very calm. And here they are on display. And see this guy, the mascot, and guess what his name is? Bud, for Budweiser. They weigh about 2,300 pounds, and they're about 17 to 19 hands high. A hand is roughly 4 inches, so that would be about 5.5 feet. I'll show you the shoe in a minute, but each of the shoes is from a 4 3/4 pound bar of steel. And these are just beautiful horses. For Budweiser, you have to be this color. Now this is in the stable the night before, but when they get outside on that sun, they look blacker than they are. But you have to have this color, and you have to have those 4 leg stockings, and the face must be white. All of that is if you're going to be a Budweiser Clydesdale. The mascot is named Bud, as I said, and is a Dalmatian. The home stables in St. Louis are a National Historic Landmark. And the outfit travels about 40,000 miles a year. Here is one of the feet. I put a quarter down, and yes, I picked the quarter up before I left, just to give you an idea of how big that foot is. And that horseshoe on it is really big. So I enjoy the Clydesdale horses. They're kind of neat. Now we're going to look at some animals, not birds. We'll do the birds later, and these are going to be mostly Western, but not all. And we'll go rapidly through them. I'll just tell you where I shot them. And this is a wolf up in Alaska in Denali National Park. I've only seen 2 wild wolves in my life, and this is one of them. And then up in Manitoba, up at Churchill, this polar bear. That's what he looks like, and here's a close-up of his face. And then moose. Moose is another neat animal. You'll see these up in New England as well. But that's a mother and a calf, and then it's followed by, out in Denali, a bull. He's a little fuzzy. He won't quite come into focus, but he's pretty big guy.